Like I said, last time we talked, we left Napoleon standing on the shores of the island of Elba. But why was he there? What had happened to Napoleon? Get away. He was captured, but what happened? How did he get captured? What happened to him? What happened to his army? He had a big army. Remember, he was conquering everything in the world. 400,000 members of his army died when they attacked whom? Russia, because it got cold there and they burned everything, and then they retreated and they got killed all the way home. And so he's overthrown. Actually, Napoleon wanted to keep fighting. I didn't tell you that the last time, but his generals said no. So he's like, let's go. Like, we're fine. We got 20,000 dudes. Let's fight them. And the rest of them are like, no, we will lose. And so they didn't. And so he gets put on the island of Elba. And the story ends, right? They put him there because they thought they'd never have to deal with him again. Unfortunately, they were wrong. You already got all this. He's on the island of Elba, not far from the coastline of Italy and also not far from the coastline of France. It's where it gets a little hinky, and we get something called the 100 days. And the 100 days starts by restoring a monarch to France. See, the European powers, the British, the Russians, all them people were ruled by absolute monarchs. And so they restored an absolute monarch back to power. They make Louis's brother, Louis the 16th that got his head chopped off, his brother becomes the king. Now, why his brother? A couple reasons why, right? Why might your brother take power instead of somebody else? As a king, who should get power next? His son. So what happened to his son? He did have a son. We didn't talk about it, so you might not have known. He had a son, and his son died in prison. Remember, they were in prison. He had his head chopped off. So Louis the 16th son dies in prison, so his brother gets the throne. He's placed on there because they wanted to have a king in charge and restore the monarchy and restore order in France. Problem was that the peasants hated him. They despised him and even forced him to flee France for safety, because what did they do to the last king? Chopped his head off, right? They felt that he was going to overturn some of the decisions that had been made during the French Revolution, some of the freedoms that they got, some of the land that the peasants had received. So he was not well liked. Guess who this was really good news for? Napoleon. He used this as like a sign. They need me. France needs me back. So what does he do? He decides that it's time to come back. So Napoleon, on March 1st of April 15, lands in France after escaping the island of Elba. As he lands in France, joyous crowds welcome him. Literally, the French people are so excited that he is back home. They love this man. Why? What had he done for France? Yeah, he made them a huge empire, as big as like the Romans. So France was great with Napoleon, and we are a very nostalgic people. We're always talking about, well, back in my day, right? Well, back in Napoleon's day, they were great. So they wanted to return to that former glory. And his goal is to reclaim his empire. Well, here's the thing. He needed an army. So all along the way, as he marched towards Paris, volunteers started joining his army because, like Eli said, what happened to his army? They all died. I mean, almost all of them. So he's got this new army now. And, of course, he's Napoleon, so what's he going to do? He's going to try to win. He's going to attack people and try to take land. So the other people that had been fighting against him were like, oh, no, this guy's back. This guy that whooped our butts for like 20 years. We don't want him back. It's kind of like when you play when the Alabama plays a certain team, you're like, they still got that guy? Like when Clemson had not Trevor Lawrence, when they had Deshaun Watson, I was like, golly. Or no, Hunter Renfrow. Man, that guy was there forever. It was like, is he ever going to leave? Because every year they got him and they beat us. But we did win that one. But it's okay. Either way, this is how they felt about Napoleon. Also, notice how he looks in this picture. He's the guy with his hand over his heart there. Does he look small to you there? Looks normal sized. This is by the French people. Okay? Joyous crowds cheering him as he returns. They're excited. They made him look good. The British always made him look short. They didn't like him. So all this 100 days comes to a meeting point at the Battle of Waterloo, not our neighbors past Central. I am 100% positive that they didn't have a massive battle at Waterloo in 1812. There were some battles at Waterloo, Civil War, but not this. And so this final battle of the Napoleonic Wars would determine whether Napoleon survives as emperor or not. He would be met on the field by the Duke of Wellington and the commander of the Prussian armies, Gebhard Lieberich. I'm probably not saying his name correctly, sorry. I'm not German. So I got nothing. It's probably like, anything German, you just throw some phlegm in it. Yeah, it's pretty good. Get the in there. Pretty good. Okay, so here's the guys he's fighting against. Duke of Wellington's pretty good general. And they square off, and Napoleon attacks first. On June 18th, 1815, he attacks. The British army defends its ground all day. Now remember, basically nobody besides the Russians could withstand, and they didn't really beat his army. They lost because of all kinds of other stuff. Nobody could beat Napoleon on the battlefield because he outmaneuvered people. He had all these cutting-edge tactics. Why were the British people able to defeat him this time, or at least stand on the same ground as his army this time? Maybe a little bit. That's true. It could be all those things. What was his army made up of this time instead of last time? Volunteers. They weren't well-trained soldiers like they had been the last couple of years, where he had all these guys, that knew what they were doing. These guys were fresh recruits because he had to rebuild his army. So they are not able to defeat the British. The Prussian army arrives and reinforces the British forces. 2 days later, Napoleon's exhausted troops are defeated and chased from the field, ending the 100 days. Napoleon eventually would have to surrender. It ended his last bid for power. And the British and the Russians and the Prussians all have a decision to make. What are they going to do with Napoleon? What do you think? What? Yeah. Y'all reading ahead a little bit, but that's a good idea. Right? They are going to send him away again. They made a better decision this time. They wanted to take no chances of a return for Napoleon. Now, last time he was just a couple 100 miles from France. This time, he's all the way on the island of St. Helena. This is where he was the first time. There's France. Here's where he is this time, all the way in the South Atlantic Ocean. If he's coming back, you're going to know it. And so he was not able to return from this one. The story will end as he lives there lonely in exile for about 6 years, writing his stories of his life. And then he dies in 1821 of what some would say cancer, a stomach ailment, which would also probably lead to the reason why he was much smaller. He was disease-ridden. He would have shrunk in his old age and with the disease crippling his body. And so the British autopsy of him being 5'3" would have probably made sense, because you've seen it before. People that are sick usually shrink, get a little bit shorter. Same thing here. But kind of anticlimactic. That's why there's all these conspiracy theories that he was poisoned, that they tried to kill him, that they wanted to make sure he didn't return home. And so the story of Napoleon ends on the island of St. Helena, and so with it, the end of the French Revolution, or the great period of the Napoleonic era. Any questions there? Now the true question is, how do we fix Europe? France has destroyed the balance of power in Europe. It's destroyed how people govern themselves, and it has brought all these revolutionary ideas into Europe. So there's got to be a way to fix it, and there we get the Congress of Vienna. This was a meeting to find peace, long-term peace, in Europe. They met in Vienna, Austria. And they had certain goals. They made a bunch of decisions. The 5 great powers of Europe are the ones that met there. Who do you think the 5 great powers of Europe are? France, Great Britain, Russia. You said one, Prussia. Austria, yes. Those 5 great powers met and basically devised a plan. And they were led by the foreign minister of Austria, Clemens von Metternich. He had a 3-part plan. He wanted to contain France, he wanted to create a balance of power, and he wanted to create legitimacy. And I'll kind of go over those here in just a second. This marked the first time that all of Europe met for a common goal. The people that met here were very conservative. Remember, the powers in Europe at this time are not progressive and they're not liberal in their stance of democracy. They are looking to control the people through absolute monarchies. And they do so pretty well. Some of the things that they did was restore the balance of power and keep Europe at peace. They wanted to resize the old powers, Britain, Prussia, Russia, Austria, and France, so that each one was equal in power. They didn't want to severely punish France because France might do what in return? They might fight back. If you get mad enough, you usually get frustrated and you want to seek revenge. That actually comes up in World War II. We'll talk about it later on. Well, Germany was weakened in World War I so much that it was terrible. So they end up using that as a rallying cry against the world powers. That's World War I. Yeah, that's World War I. If they were all equal in power, they wouldn't want to fight each other because it would just equal into a bunch of deaths and no real gain. And so that was kind of the goal of restoring balance. Some of the other things they did is they built up I got ahead of myself. They wanted to make sure no single European power would dominate. And for the most part, it worked for about 40 years. Because European peace for almost 40 years is established. Now, that doesn't seem like very long, but when you've been fighting for 300 years, that's a pretty good little peace. Like I said, they also took steps to build up containment around France. You can see France is here to the right of your screen. They started building up many of the nations on the borders here. Not on this side, but on that side. They created the Netherlands to buffer in the northeast. They created the German Confederation by combining 39 German states into one to promote economic interest and to build up a massive, united German front there, right beside France. This is gonna, we don't have Germany yet. We've heard of Prussia, but we don't have Germany yet. This is moving towards that. The World Wars, yes. Next semester. We're getting there. We're getting there. Prussia gained some territory along the Rhine to buffer France and prevent future aggression. Switzerland became a fully independent country, again, to buffer France. So they made all these countries around France stronger to prevent them from growing and being taken by France. And France lost all the land that it had acquired. You can see all in the blue lines there, and blue, dark blue is where France had conquered areas. Well, they took all that, and this is what it looked like after. It just had France again. They restored the absolute, or not the absolute monarch, they restored a monarch in France and kept some of the French ideals like the rights of man, that document that gave them equality, liberty, and fraternity, freedom of speech, things of that sort. But also they established the French Republic, so it was a constitutional monarchy where the people did have some power, which is good because it was a kind of a mixed bag emotionally for the French. Yes. That one. They wanted to establish legitimacy of rulers. That was the kind of the last step. They placed all these old monarchs back in charge because they didn't believe normal people or regular people or the peasants could rule over a country. They didn't think that they could do things. And that makes sense. When the regular people gained power in France, what happened to most of them? What happened during that chaotic period of the French Revolution? What were they doing to everybody? Yeah, they're chopping everybody's heads off. So they didn't believe that people could actually control themselves. So they wanted to put the nobles back in charge. This would give legitimacy to their rule. People would respect it. And hopefully it would lead to less fighting. And it did for about 40 years. The legacy is that this Congress of Vienna would influence world politics for the next 100 years. They would establish a balance of power. It would create the beginnings of nationalism and the spread of it to places like Italy, Germany, and Greece. And these same ideas led to more people believing in the Enlightenment ideals of liberty, freedom, individual rights, and democracy. It had changed, the French Revolution had changed the social attitudes and assumptions that had dominated Europe for centuries. And we'll see that a new era is about to begin. And we have meetings like this now. We have something called the UNs, the United Nations, and they meet with people or meet with countries to I guess, resolve issues that come up all the time. But that's the French Revolution. That's the Napoleonic era and the end of it, the effects of it. We're going to talk about more effects of it as we go forward in the next week. But those are your notes, and that is also your study guide. Okay? So you need to study your notes for your test. Now, I have created a Kahoot that is also something that you could use to study. So we'll do that next. Are there any that I need to go back over? Any questions? Yes. Yes. We got all this, right? Okay. Go to Schoology. Or not Schoology. Get on your Chromebook and go to Kahoot. But what I'll show you for video's sake is where this is. So if you go to Kahoot, or go to Schoology, and you go to your course, so every course has one of these. Over to the right, there's a link. Right here, it says Kahoot Review. Click in that, and you click here. This will take you to the Kahoot. You can play this at home anytime you want up until tomorrow night, which would make sense because you already taken the test. So that is where it is, right there. And every course has one. If you have any questions, send me an email, and have a great day.